You've certainly heard his name if you listen to the show. He was even, he usually comes to these events. He's a faithful attendee. And I said, Albert, are you going to come? He says, no, this is just too creepy. Even for Albert Vinzel. This is a conspiracy culture presentation, a conspiracy culture event. Of course, Patrick and Kadena, really, I've built an incredible community, and I know they're very, very appreciative of your support. I just want to say one more thing before I bring Patrick out here, and that is to remind you of an upcoming event, the next sort of major event that both Conspiracy Culture and myself are involved with, and that is, of course, the Alien Cosmic Expo happening in my hometown of Brantford, Ontario, and that's June 24th, 25th, and 26th. And on the Friday, there's going to be what they're calling an experiencer session. So if any of you are attending and have had an experience within the sort of the UFO realm, you'll want to make sure that you're there for that. And then Friday night at the dinner, there'll be a Friday night dinner, and also the presentation, a premiere of a film about Travis Walton, of course, one of the most famous alien abductees of all time. And then Saturday, I'm going to be moderating a panel, a disclosure panel, and it's going to sort of mirror the disclosure panel that happened down in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. So there'll be, instead of former members of Congress, there will be members of the press, and of course an absolutely stellar panel with a who's who. We've got Richard Dolan, Nick Pope, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, Grant Cameron, Victor Vigiani, probably Travis Walton will be on that panel as well. Stephen Bassett, sort of the grandfather of the disclosure movement, some might say. So that's on the Saturday. So again, that's June 24th, 25th, 26th, Brantford, Ontario, and it's at the Brant Park Inn. For more information, and you can order tickets right off the website, I understand, and that's aliencosmicexpo.com. All right, let's bring our good friend Patrick White from Conspiracy Culture out here for a moment.
I'm just as anxious as everybody else to hear David, so I'll keep it under 30 seconds. I really appreciate everybody coming out to spend an afternoon, evening with us on such a beautiful day. It really means a lot to see such a collective of interesting, critically thinking individuals all together in one space. It warms the cockles of my heart. And again, check our website out. We post news, videos. If anything's going on in Toronto relating to these topics, we'll usually have banners up on the website. It's conspiracyculture.com. Thank you to our helpers. Thank you to my beautiful wife, Kadena, who's out in the lobby helping out. I hope you enjoy the show. Thanks again for coming out, everyone. Have a good day.
All right, to the main entree. David Paulides, Missing 411, is the first comprehensive book about people who have disappeared in the wilds of North America. It's understood that people routinely get lost, or some others want to disappear. But this story is about the unusual. A tip from a national park disappeared ranger led to David's 3-year, 7,000-plus hour investigative effort into the understanding of the stories behind people who have vanished. His books, chronicle children, adults, and the elderly who have disappeared, sometimes even in the presence of friends and relatives. As search and rescue personnel exhaust leads and places to search, relatives start to believe kidnapping and abductions have occurred. Paulides has studied the archives of missing people for similarities, traits, and geographical clusters. Topography plays a part into the age of the victim, and certain clusters have specific age and sex consistency that is absolutely baffling. This is not a phenomenon inclusive to just the last few years or days. No. Clusters of missing people have been identified as far back as the 1800s. I welcome David Paulides.
Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Patrick and Kadena and to Richard for setting this up. It's a rare opportunity that I get to talk to people from the North. What do you do? Testing. Perfect. So a little bit about me is I grew up in California, Bay Area, suburb of San Jose. I went to school at University of California at Berkeley and the University of San Francisco. I got a master's degree from there. In my career, I went on to being a policeman in a small town called Fremont in the Bay Area. Finished my career with San Jose Police. Worked on the MERGE team, which is the SWAT team. I worked in street crimes unit, the decoy teams that work downtown. Worked as a detective. My final few assignments were as a sex registrant task force member. And at the end of my career, I was working in a liaison unit. After my 20 years in law enforcement, I thought that it was going to be enough, and I had a friend that ran human resources for Fujitsu Corporation. He said, "Dave, come work for me." And I had a master's degree in HR, so I went there and ended up taking everything west of the Mississippi and running HR for them for a couple of years. It was a real interesting paradigm shift for me to see the workplace and apply investigations there. After a few more years in HR, I ended up leaving, and I thought, okay, that's enough. I've got it now. And then some things happened, and some people in technology approached me about some things to do. And namely, it was a person out of the Yukon that had a technology company that was bringing new, innovative research to the diamond industry. And that's how I learned about Canadian diamonds. And I spent 3 years with this company as the head of business development, went to Africa, talked to the people there, mining people, essentially traveled throughout the territories in the Great North here and learned about the great people here and how close you and I are that many people really don't understand. And when I got into this research, the closeness between Canadians and the U.S. on missing people is almost beyond comprehension. They're almost cookie-cutter cases that we're going to talk about tonight. There was an article in the Star, and usually I start a talk about something local, and there was an article in the Star about Morley Safer. And we kind of laid claim to him in the States, but he was really from Canada. And they talked about how Safer was entrenched in the U.S., but never lost his Canadian sensibility. This is a quote. He had that little bit of ironic distance that Canadians have about the United States. They love it, they love coming here, but it's a wider sphere of opportunity, but they have that little sardonic twist about the United States. And let me tell you that many U.S. citizens have that sardonic twist about our own country. So I can tell you that we're a lot closer than most people think. So first of all, we're going to go through some slides here about things that happened close to Toronto. We'll start there, and then we're going to slowly move out. So I want to grab your attention and let you know it's happening really close. Yeah, sure. One thing that's in my books is the word coincidence. A lot of people don't believe in it. A lot of people think, well, if it's a coincidence, there has to be some underlying ties. And this is a quote that we have on the wall in our office, and I think it's important. This quote came up about a month ago. I want everyone to read it, and I'll give you a few seconds, but I think it's right on key to what we're doing tonight. That quote is important to me because I don't think we live in that island of ignorance. I just think that sometimes we aren't given the knowledge to look at the entirety of what's around us. But Lovecraft really nailed it for me. We shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into peace and safety of a new dark age. So, talk about what we're doing tonight. The related elements, victims and disabilities, or highly intellectual. There's a lot of components to this that until you read about it, it's hard to really grasp. But for starters, there's two ends of that intellectual spectrum that tend to disappear in abnormal amounts. We have people with inherent disabilities, and we have people that are brilliant that are disappearing. And I'm talking about super brilliant. Canines, people disappear with dogs. Bloodhounds can't or won't track the scent. Many people are found near creeks, rivers, and water, national parks. There's a geographical clustering effect in North America and in the world at this point. Boulder fields, mountains, and water are in common with this. In the early research, I chronicled a series of people that disappeared and berries were involved, the most notable being huckleberries. Lots of times people are found in the middle of swamps or near. And in the infrequent times when people are found and they're alive, they can't remember, don't want to remember, or recall something that's very strange. If they're found most commonly in a semi-conscious or unconscious state, face down. Many times they're missing clothes and shoes. The most common time for disappearance is late afternoon and early evening, by a very preponderance of the numbers. And in Missing 411, The Devil's in the Detail, I have an entire table there that shows dozens of times and dozens of times that people are found in an area that's previously been searched. Not just once, sometimes dozens of times. In one instance, a little boy who was missing was found laying on top of a tree that was laying across the trail, and a trail that the searchers took every day for 7 days to get out into the field. And most commonly, bad weather is associated with somehow in the disappearance. So this is the most recent cluster map. And right here around the Great Lakes is important to me. There's a book called The Great Lakes Triangle. Remember that book, The Great Lakes Triangle. Everybody in this room should read it. And it's about the disappearances of planes, boats, ships, and people around the Great Lakes. And it was written about 40 years ago. None of my work comes from that book, but Jay Gorley is the guy who wrote it. He really nailed some interesting facts associated with the disappearances around the Great Lakes. It's hard to argue when you look at this around the lakes, all the way down the Appalachians. Starting down here, there's like a upside down horseshoe that covers disappearances. So these are the Rocky Mountains. This is Idaho and Washington. And then right down the chain of the Cascades, where there's volcanic activity, all of these disappearances right here are all within 100 miles of the Pacific Ocean. These are all within probably 300 or 400 miles of the Atlantic. These are all on or near the Great Lakes. Then there's this area right down here through the middle of the United States, north-south, where there essentially is nothing. And what is that? That's your farthest distance from water. Then you have Alaska. Alaska is a weird state because there's probably 100 times more disappearances there than are on that map. But they all don't fit the profile points, and I could probably spend a lifetime researching cases in Alaska. There are so many. But my last book, Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence, deals with young men, 99% of them are young men, that disappear in an urban setting near water. Predominantly, these are all Minnesota and Wisconsin disappearances. Most of these are college towns. Person's in a bar, drinking with friends. All of a sudden, their friends look around and they're not there anymore. And they don't even know how they disappeared, but they weren't there. There's a big search, they're not found. Days later, they're found in the water. I'm not going to take credit with finding this revelation because another detective from New York did it. But he originally got onto it he found bodies in the Hudson River of young adults, mostly college kids, that went missing. They pull the kid out of the river and the kid's gone 8 days. He's been missing for 8 days. Well, the coroner looks at the body and says, well, it only shows evidence of being in the river for 2 or 3 days. Well, where's the kid been for the other 5 days? Then some other people started to pick up on it, and they said, oh, well, this is happening in Wisconsin and Minnesota. I want everybody to go home, and later on, I want you to Google Manchester Canal deaths. Manchester Canal deaths. Manchester, the UK, this is going on right now. They have over 60 of these cases. And they've kind of coined this the pusher, because they think somebody's pushing these people in the water. It's never been caught on film. It's never been seen. There's never been a suspect. Yet all these people have died. Now, if you look up here, Boston, New York, goes up inside the East Coast. There's also, weirdly, a few cases around LA, a few in Arizona, and a few around New Orleans, a few in Florida. But predominantly, these are focused around the lower Great Lakes and the East Coast. And we're going to talk about these cases right here tonight. Next. Common denominators. Anybody tell me what the common denominator is of each one of these adults? Each one of those people is a physician that disappeared. And I could probably double that map in the last year or 2 years of physicians that have disappeared under weird circumstances. Talika Patrick was driving down a road in northern Indiana, pulled to the side of the road, got out of her car, and disappeared. There was a lake across the highway from where she disappeared. They brought in the FBI. They brought in underwater submersibles. They searched this small lake for a week, didn't find anything. 3 months later, she floats up in that lake. James McGrogan, I actually did a video about this that's on our site on YouTube. If you go onto YouTube, look at canammissing.com. His story is there. He was also from Indiana by coincidence. And he came out to Colorado to do a hike outside of Vail, and he disappeared. He was found 2 weeks later, 2 mountain ranges over, in an area that was impossible to get to, according to experts on the route he took. We interviewed the experts. They said, we don't know how he got from here to there. He died of a fractured skull in the middle of winter, wearing a helmet, and they found him with no boots on. Another factor in many of these disappearances that I talk about. I could go down the line. This is a girl and her boyfriend. She's a physician. He was an attaché from Quebec. They disappeared in British Columbia. They've never been found. Let's see what else. This is a daughter. This is the daughter and the dad. He's an emergency room physician from Denver, Boulder actually. They were hiking a 14er on Mount Missouri, and they disappeared somewhere near the top of the mountain. So when you hike a 14er in Colorado, there's nothing up there but boulders and rocks and things. There's no trees. And you disappear. There's no place to go. They searched for a week, and they flew the same route for the helicopter every day, and they dropped people on the summit, and they came down different routes. On the 7th day, flying the same route in, at the bottom of the mountain, they noticed 2 bodies there. It was them. On the 7th day, they saw them. Where were they for the other 6? They interviewed the sheriff on that case, and they said, how did those people end up there? And he goes, there was no wind. It was perfect weather. We can't find an area where they fell from. We don't understand how this happened. Next. It's a story about a physician that disappeared on Mount Washington. And here's the part I want everyone to read. It says, from unexplained injuries of his head and body, sustained while hiking. They don't know how these men and women get the injuries that they did that kill them. Next. This is the McGrogan case I talked about. Go ahead, next. The doctor and his daughter climbing Mount Missouri. Next. Common denominator here. Weird group here. All young ladies and women that have disappeared and never been found. Yosemite National Park right there. Teresa Beer lived in a community right next to where I used to live in California. And that was the number one case I ever researched because I knew about her and the tragedy that went through her family. She was with her dad. They went into Yosemite on horseback with a group party. There was like 8 of them. And they got into the middle of the park and they were staying at these cabins. And she got off her horse and the wrangler took the horses and she kind of freshened up with her dad. And she goes, hey, Dad, I'm going to walk out there to that point 100 yards away with this other 78-year-old man. I'm going to take some pictures. Everybody sees her walk out to the rock. She sits down with the man. She's taking pictures. She tells the man, hey, I'm going to walk down this boulder field right here. And a quarter mile down there, she saw this lake, and I'm going to go take some pictures of the lake. I'll be right back. Man says, yeah, everybody sees her walk down the mountain. She disappears at a tree line that's surrounding this lake. Nobody ever saw her again. The only thing they found on the search was the lens cap to her camera inside the tree line around the lake. They searched for 3 weeks, never found anything. I filed the Freedom of Information Act against the National Park Service for that case, and an attorney called and asked, why do I want that case? I go, hey, that's an inappropriate question. According to the law, you can't ask that if you're going to release it or not. I'm doing research and I just want the case. No. I go, what do you mean no? Well, we're not going to say anything more, but no. 2 weeks later, a special investigator from the National Park Service, an agent named YU, calls me and says, why do you want that case? I said, what does it matter? I just want the case. She lived in a community near me. Now, quote him, you will never see that case. I go, why do you talk to me like that? I mean, he goes, no, you're never going to see it. That's the only case that the National Park Service has that I've identified by name, date, and location that they haven't given me, and I don't know why. She's never been found. That's Stacey Harris. Teresa Beer disappeared in Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Colorado. She went to her grandparents' dude ranch outside of Pinedale. Her brother said, yeah, everyone saw her walk down to this area and she was going to sun right next to this beautiful lake. Her brother came back about 3 hours later. She wasn't there. This is in the middle of Nowheresville. I mean, it's like a 20-mile road to get into this place. I went there 2 summers ago. And the area where she disappeared, they searched it for 4 days. They went up over the top of this one mountain, and on the backside of the mountain, they found all of her clothes in a pile. 50 miles in that direction is nothing but wilderness, no roads, nothing. Disappeared. She has never been found. A lot of rumors, she stripped down and she walked out 20 miles to leave. Her twin brother said that would never happen. Let me see. Thelma Melton, Great Smoky Mountain National Park, disappeared on a hike. In Arkansas, Park, Arkansas, disappeared walking on a trail in a state park, never found. Amador County, on the outskirts of Yosemite, her husband was tilling the field. She was riding it with him. He dropped her off and she goes, I'm going to just walk home. It's like 100 yards through the field. She's never been found. Next. Common denominator. This is an interesting one. Anybody know? All runners, they were all runners that disappeared. Jarzik, running on a sidewalk in New Jersey, disappeared, was found in the Hudson River. Running outside of Northern California, she disappeared at the same time a second person disappeared in that same state park within 11 days. Both were found, both deceased. Victor Tenney, a world-class runner we're going to talk about later. Another world-class runner disappeared on the hills of Hawaii. Jonathan Ajay is the LA County Sheriff, disappeared in Devil's Peak on the backside of LA County running in the mountains. Has never been found. Mika True, a world-famous athlete for trail running, disappeared, was found 3 days later laying in a creek, deceased. Anybody know this man right there? We'll talk about him later. And Michael Lemaitre was running a race in Seward, Alaska. And he was the last man to reach this peak. And you run from Seward up to this peak, and then you come down. He was the last man up, and the race profiler said, hey, are you okay? He goes, yeah, I know the way down. I'm going down The official said he saw him going down. Never seen again. Huge search. Never found. Next. Okay, Jeffrey Boucher, Whitby, Alaska. Anybody tell me about the case?
Disappeared last year, the year before. Never found.
Okay, he's a high school teacher. High school teacher, 2 daughters. Mr. Stability. Every morning at 6 a.m., he wakes up, rain or shine, snow or ice, and he runs. His wife says, I heard him get out of bed. I heard him put his shoes on, and he left. He didn't come back. She calls the police. The police start searching. They know the area he runs in every day. He's not a person to take risk. He's a very simple, stable, simplistic person who runs in this kind of rural area out in Whitby near his house. He didn't come back. They brought in canines. Canines didn't find a scent. They tried to track. They couldn't find any tracks that they could guarantee were his. They thought maybe, and his wife said, no, I don't think so, but they thought maybe he ran off the wharf and slipped on the ice and fell in the water. So they brought in robotic underwater cameras and they searched that area for days. They didn't find anything. It went on and on like that. Next. 52 years old, father, geography teacher, married 21 years, a daily runner. He was missing 6 a.m. January 13th. Go ahead. Body found March 29th. Hayden Shore Pavilion. They first found one of his shoes in that area. Then they found another shoe. Police found the body. He's naked, and they said he was frozen like an ice cube. Now, what's important about this is the lake wasn't frozen. It was not frozen when they found the body. So what I want everyone to do, if you think this isn't odd, is to take an ice cube and put it in water and see how long the ice cube lasts. It's not going to last that long. Because the churning of the water, because of the temperature of the water, he should not have been frozen. I've talked to a lot of experts about this. Now, the wife said, yeah, they told me that they figured that there was no cocaine in his system. And she goes, but they couldn't tell me anything else. They couldn't figure out why he died. Now, that's a common feature. And what's happened is I've done so many presentations around North America in the last several years, medical examiners are starting to pay attention. And there's 3 I talk to on a regular basis. Because I have to understand for myself why this may be odd and why this case may not be odd. In general, medical examiners, coroners, have the ability to determine the cause of death. And when they don't determine the cause of death, that's not normal. If somebody drowns, they should be able to figure out they drowned. If somebody has a head injury, they should be able to figure that out. If there's a ligature mark around the neck, hey, maybe they were strangled. But in all these things, in a majority of the cases that we're going to talk about, the cause of death is a tough thing to determine. And on many of those times, they can't figure it out. In Boucher's case, they never could determine the cause of death. And that is not normal. Yes?
Wasn't there something, though, about him putting something on Twitter, though, the day before, and then they took it down?
There's a lot of rumors about incidents. And let me tell you something about rumors. Don't believe any of them.
But somebody posted a tweet, and then it had been removed.
So if the implication was suicide, he wasn't suicidal. If the implication is that he purposely did it, then the police by law have to say it. And they did. So there was no indication that there was suicide. And they publicly came out and said that.
You know that somebody wrote a book saying it was suicide, right?
Oh, in fact, I read that book.
Yeah.
There's so many things about that book that are blatantly tunnel vision. And what I'll say about that is most police officers in communities know what's happening in that community. And they don't have the time, they don't have the wherewithal to look at something from, say, 40,000 feet. Now, when that lady wrote that book, She was looking at it, in my opinion, from that community's perspective. But she wasn't looking at it from 50,000 feet like I'm going to be looking at it for you tonight. Now, Boucher had so many of the profile points that we're talking about in my last book. It should overwhelm you with the coincidence. Namely, if the person wanted to commit suicide, they should be able to prove that. You know, if you're taking drugs, it's going to be in your system. How many ways can you commit suicide? Shoot yourself in the head? That'd be pretty obvious. Strangle yourself? That would be obvious. But none of those points are visible. Go ahead. Anybody know about this case? Happened in the province here. Rainbow Falls Provincial Park. She was a teacher just east of Thunder Bay, right on Lake Superior, camping with 2 cousins and 2 friends. In the morning, Christine gets up, and she's with one of her friends, and they went on a jog. As is so common in these cases, the other one comes back and says, somehow we just got separated. And that's exactly what it says 1,000 times. I don't know how, but we just got separated. And again, when you're looking at one particular case, I'm the policeman, I'm going to look real hard at that person she was last with. That's just the way it is. And I may sit them down in a room and go minute by minute about what happened. But again, if you look at the case from that local level, it's a local issue. And you're going to hear local solutions. Go ahead. Huge search, 80 officers, helicopters, airplanes. They have forward-looking radar, infrared radar, meaning that if there's a heat signature anywhere on the ground, if there's a bear or a deer, it's going to come up. Canines don't find a scent. No aggressive bears were in the area per parks. Cousins and friends were cleared of any ill intent. Trails in that area were very well defined. Many of them were paved. Christine Kalika is still a missing person to this day. Next. This is kind of what the park looks like in that area. It's gorgeous. Parts of it are really thick. But again, if you're going to run the trails, it's really well defined. You may think, well, if it's a bear attack, there's going to be a big scene. And this is what I try to explain to people. Whenever a bear attacks a human, you are going to fight for your life. And you're going to scream, you're going to yell. If by chance the bear wins the battle, there's going to be blood, hair, clothing. There's going to be drag marks. It's going to be so obvious you can't miss it. None of this stuff happened. None of it was visible. Next. This is the runner from Seaward I was talking about. That's an actual picture of him when he was coming up the mountain. That's Seaward in the background. Paul was an older guy, but he had run for years and years and years, was in phenomenal shape. Where can they go? It's unbelievable. Nobody can understand this. Okay. Mika True ran every day of his life. Ran with his dog a majority of the time. Disappeared for several days when he was running. And they ended up finding him in 10 inches of water, up to his chest. His right arm was down, left one up. And the weird thing was, one of his shoes were off, laying in water. And they said he had cardiomyopathy. Nobody could believe it because he was in such phenomenal shape and never had a medical issue. A lot of times, what you find when I talk to medical examiner friends of mine, they say that there are local answers for local issues. Many times, the victims' families don't believe the medical examiner, and they'll hire an outside medical examiner to do a secondary autopsy. About 80% of the time, the findings by that second medical examiner are in conflict with the first. And it's not that there's a suspect in the case that they're trying to prove. It's just the facts don't support it. And there's political pressures in every community to make everyone feel cozy, that there's no problems, there's nothing strange, don't worry about it. A very, very, very strange case. Victor Tenney in the Canary Islands. That is exactly a look at where he took off running. And just outside that picture to the left, there's nothing there on the ground. He was running up above tree level. There's no place to go. He was a world-class triathlete that ran every day. Next picture. There's the mountain in the background that he was running. He's never been found. Where could he go? And once you start to think, okay, world-class athlete, super smart guy, in a national park, officials have no explanation. They're stymied. We don't have any idea where he went. Now, again, if you lived in the Canary Islands and this happened one time, it's not going to mean anything. But when you look at a worldwide scale, how many runners disappear in a forested setting, are never found, canines can't find a scent. I often tell people that canines, bloodhounds, they're not political. They don't care what day it is. You know, they just want to get out there in the field and all they want to do is their job. They have so much fun doing it. They want to search. They love that life. And when a dog walks in circles and sits down, there's no scent. They don't care about the politics of it. So how can that be? Doesn't make any sense at all. It's a math professor, and when I talk about smart guys, he's brilliant. And he was training in the Waianae Mountains in Hawaii on Oahu, disappeared. And those were the mountains that they look like. I've actually been there many times. They're not treacherous. It's not dangerous. That's why he was running there. That's why he was training there. And they found him at the 7th day off a cliff in an area that no one expected him to be in. And it was an area that was overflown by HPD for 3 or 4 days with FLIR, and they didn't see a body. Next. It's a guy from Hoboken, New Jersey. Police had videotape of him running along the Hudson River on a path that people walked by the hundreds a day. He came back from with some friends at the end of the night. He was training for a long run, and he vanished. And when I heard of this case, I could have bet $1,000 he's going to be in the Hudson River. That's exactly where they found him. Next. And again, the New York detective that first got onto these type of cases was already gone from New York at this, and I read the write-up on this death, and I thought, this is just a complete washover. People aren't looking at it from that 50,000 feet perspective. They're answering this, no signs of foul play, nothing unusual happened, he just fell in the river. Now, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, they had, I think, 12 students from that general area that disappeared over a 15-year period, all found in the river deceased. And the police chief calls this big meeting, and I talk about it in my book. And he calls the community into a basketball auditorium, and he starts to say, hey, you know what? It just happens. Kids go out drinking. They go and they jump in the river to cool off, or they just fell in the river. And he got screamed out of the auditorium because nobody believed it. And I can tell you that it's an enlightened community that groups together like that and really goes after somebody in authority. And it was funny because the actual mayor's wife in the town told him, you better not do this because none of the community believes you. And I don't even believe you. The mayor's wife. Right. 2 trail runners. This is the first one. Mount Tamalpais is north of San Francisco on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, very near Point Reyes National Park, where I've written about other people who have disappeared. It's a picture of Magdalena, takes off running, disappears. Her parents, everyone come out, they're looking for her. Her body was found in a very steep and rugged canyon on the southeast slopes of the mountain. It was located in an area that was not easily accessible. Members of Marin County Search and Rescue that led the search were assisted by other counties as well. They never believed that she would have went there, and her parents said there's no way she would have went into that area. She would have stayed on trails. Next. Within days after that, Marie Sanner disappears in the exact same area with her dog. She's found under almost identical circumstances, and the front pages of the paper in that area all said, there's got to be a killer, there's got to be this, there's got to be that. The police say, oh, it's just a coincidence. Again, 2 cases, nothing for 20, 30 years before, and nothing since. And that's the way a lot of these things happen. Now, if I have 10 cases like this in one area, obviously everyone's suspicion is going to be raised. Everyone's going to be focusing that bright light. If I do 1, 2 cases a year, I do nothing for 6 or 7 years, and then I have one other case, things like that happen. But I call this another spoke in the wheel, and this is water-related men's deaths. And at the beginning, I was reluctant to start going down this trail because I didn't really know if I could prove that it was related to the other 4 books that I wrote on Missing 411. After I got into it, canines can't track a scent from the person last seen. A lot of times there's no cause of death, blah, 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 blah. Son of a gun, it's all a match. The difference being is that the paradigm of Missing 411 over here with this over here, some people who don't and won't read the books can easily say they're not related. Once you read the books, you see the line of thought and how it's all related. Next. Kind of the basis for that book. Disappears in a city, found in water. The person is not in the water for the entire time they're missing. This is important. Most commonly, unknown cause of death. They somehow got separated from the parties they were with. There's no scent trail point to point, no tracks. And here's an important point. And I will tell you that being in this world and getting some notoriety for the books, I've had people contact me that would just blow your mind. And I'm talking about people that hold top secret clearances. So one person got a hold of me and says, we got to have lunch. We sit down and we talk, and he goes, Dave, that GHB in the system was brilliant. You said something that everyone is ignoring right now. Hold that thought. GHB is a date rape drug, most commonly used. You pour it in someone's alcoholic beverage. Within a short period of time, they feel groggy and drowsy. You carry them out to the car, you take them home, and you date rape. And then they don't have a memory the next day of what happened. That's most commonly what happened. The reality is, in these cases, nobody sees the person drowsy, drunk, stumbling, staggering. Nobody sees the person leave with somebody else. There's never a fight. There's never a struggle. The person is there 1 minute and gone the next minute. And that's just the way it is. But in these cases, most commonly, in fact, like 99% of the time, coroners and medical examiners don't screen for GHB in blood. There's like a screen of 40 drugs. GHB is not one of them. What happened is that one time, a medical examiner says, you know what, we've had a lot of these cases. I'm just going to screen for everything. It's going to cost me a lot of money. I'm going to do it. Bango. He gets a hit for GHB. GHB is something that is produced in the body in minuscule amounts. A lot of people don't know this. But in the quantities that they're finding it, it's huge in the body. But it's also one of those drugs that leaves the body quickly after it's ingested. Now, how these people got the GHB is the $1,000,000 question. I've stated before, I think it's something aerosol. I think there's something, some way that someone's targeted. They ingest it through an aerosol means because it's never in their drink that's later tested. They never are taking drugs. A lot of these people are athletes that get drug tested, so there's no way they're going to be taking drugs. This doesn't make a lot of sense. But those water-related deaths, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Boston, New York, Michigan, Ontario. Now, how do we know the bodies aren't in the water the entire time? This is pretty simple. And this made me think about all the cases I wrote about on the trail side disappearances. When you disappear on a trail and search and rescue found you and you're dead, these people, 99% of all SAR, search and rescue workers, are volunteers. They aren't professionals. The people like you and me who volunteer their time to go out and find and save someone's life. They take courses, they do things, but they're not professionals per se. They have certifications. But when they find a body, their job's done. They go home, they did their job. They're never, ever thinking criminal. I talked to the National Association of Search and Rescue Professionals at Lake Tahoe a few years back. I gave them a presentation much like I'm giving you. And the difference being there were a huge room of people from all over North America, many from Canada. And this is exactly what I told them. I said, you guys are doing God's work. But you know what? You're never thinking criminal. You're always thinking search and rescue. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I want that paradigm shift to be, when you find a body and it's laying there with no clothes on or it's no shoes on and you can't imagine how the person got there, I want you to look. Don't move the body, but look at the feet. Do the feet show wear and tear walking over trails? If not, I want you to think, how did the person get there? And then I also want you, when you're searching, to be thinking of footwear, thinking of clothing. See something odd laying in the middle of nowhere, mark it, GPS it, pick it up, take it. Manchester, UK, I talked about, this is going on right now. I've validated 9 countries where this exact same thing is happening. And the UK is big right now on this in multiple locations, not just in Manchester. Yes, sir? I did. It was excellent. And essentially the guy threw his arms up saying, they don't know. There's a lot of, but again, the police over there sometimes will make statements like, well, you know, this stuff's happening, but nothing unusual. There's no marks on the body. Somebody, he might have slipped and fell in. And then I talked to some people in the UK who knew a lot about these cases, and they said, well, yeah, Dave, but what they're not saying is those canals, most of the time you can just stand up in them. They're not even that deep. So if a person fell in, why didn't they stand up? Well, if they have GHB in their system, you almost feel like you're paralyzed and you can't move. You recognize what's happening, but you can't do anything about it. Next. Anybody know this gentleman? Ever heard of this case? Brilliant. Physicist. Missing 12310 Deep River, Ontario, 41 years old, born in Melbourne, worked for the Atomic Energy of Canada, worked at their Chalk River labs. He was an athlete on the side, loved curling, wasn't married, lived alone in a single-family house, just like probably you and I live in. Next. January 23rd, he missed the curling championships, and this is what started to trigger a steamrolling effect as to what happened to Lackland. Reported as a missing person, he's what's called a powder diffraction expert at work. Don't ask me what that is. I read about it and I couldn't even explain it to you. It's so deep. So police found his residence, door unlocked, car in the garage, garbage cans at the curb. That's a key point. When he came in, he knew he had to put the garbage cans out that night. So he took a bus from work, got his ID, had his coat on, puts the garbage cans out. Next. People searched the neighborhood and the area around a river that is located about 500 to 700 feet behind his house, a couple streets over. It's a long ways away. No tracks leading to that area. The river's frozen over. There's no ice breakage. His GPS and wallet are inside his residence, again with the door unlocked. His brother lived in Australia, and this is what he said. The circumstances of the disappearance are just bizarre, said the man's brother. I talked to lots of locals there, and they think something extraordinary happened to him. I want to interview him. I want to know what extraordinary meant. Because super safe community. It's in the middle of winter, essentially. Everything's frozen. I'm not going to go out for a little midnight walk at 11:30 at night. Go ahead. Body is found in June. 2 canoeists in the Welsh Bay, east of Deep River Marina, find his body in 2.5 feet of water. He's wearing his lab coat and his ID, just like he went and put the garbage cans out just after he came home from work. unable to determine the cause of death. Police theorize he went for a late night walk at 11:30 p.m. in Northern Ontario. Anybody buy that? But his brother said that the police told him they really have no idea what happened to him. So, think about this. They walk the river. It's all frozen over. There's no broken ice. Okay? So, how did he get in the river? But my big question is, how long was he in the river? And how did he end up on that eastern side of the bay away from the marina in 2.5 feet of water? The whole thing doesn't make any sense. But as you dig deeper into all these cases, none of them really make a lot of sense. Now, the coroner doing this case, again, and I'm not being critical, I'm just being honest. Local case, local issue, local solution. Now, he isn't or she isn't aware of the hundreds of other cases I have just like this in other parts of Canada, the United States, and the world. Now, maybe if we educated them and told them, hey, I want you to look for GHB, I want you to look and specifically say how long that body was in the water. How can you tell? You can tell by the scalp, the hair removal, the fingernails, how fast the decomposition is based on the temperature of the water during the time you went missing. There's a lot of factors there that you can do in water that you really can't do on ground. Next. So they were saying that the ice is 4 feet thick when he disappeared. No tracks in the snow. Canines couldn't pick up a scent. He obviously wasn't going anywhere. He didn't lock his door. He left his wallet on the counter in his house. So the opinion about Lachlan's brother, about what neighbors said. You know, I always knew as a policeman that when I went to a house and there was a burglary, somebody breaks into your house. Basic investigation. The first thing you do is you go and you knock on each of the neighbors' doors and you talk on the neighbor across the street. And you say, hey, during this time frame, did you see anything unusual, hear anything? Is there anything happening in your neighborhood that's strange or that we should know about? Basic line of questioning. I guarantee that these guys did all this. And what they found, who knows? Next. This case really pounds home exactly what I'm talking about, and this is why it's here. This is in northern Minnesota, 24 years old. He's a Division II All-Star, All-American athlete in college. Missing 4/17/09, 10:30 p.m., Anoka. This is a cluster zone of missing people. And the area surrounding greater Minneapolis-St. Paul has a ton of these kind of disappearances, and it's scary. I've got a good friend who lives in Blaine, Minnesota. We talk almost every day about this, and he's scared, and he's a super smart guy. Found 1,500 feet from the residence he was visiting. He was found in a golf course pond. What was happening is, went to a friend's party. A lot of people there. He goes, hey, I'm going to go outside just for a bit, get some fresh air, talk to some people. He goes out into the front yard. And just like everything else, hey, did you see Jelani? Did you see Jelani? No, he was here a minute ago. He's disappeared. So, there's no cause of death when they eventually autopsied the body. But they start searching, and they find some socks over here in this backyard. And they find a cap over in this person's backyard. And they start looking around. They can't find anything. Next. They find him in this pond. This is exactly where they found him. And it's about a quarter of a mile from the house to the golf course. Now, this area all around here, it had been raining super heavy these 3 or 4 days. And the golf course was shut down. It was all muddy and mucky and yucky. Well, every once in a while, the cops do something right. Every once in a while. I got to give them credit. They pull the body out of the water, and no shoes, but his socks are on. Kind of strange. And the cops look at the socks, and they're perfectly clean, like they just came out of the washer and the dryer. And the cops say, Well, this doesn't make any sense. How did he get from the house to over here in clean socks? Because it's all muddy. Look at the muck we're standing in. So the head of detectives who was interviewing says, someone placed Johnny in the pond. And he says, it's the most frustrating case in my career. Why is it the most frustrating? Is because when it went to the coroner, they couldn't determine the cause of death. Meaning, in their opinion, he didn't drown. He didn't die from hypothermia. He didn't kill himself. There was no drugs in his system. But why this case is important is because it shows that picture that there's no way for him to walk from point A to point B. And maybe that is the point of most of these cases. In most of them, the local community, the local cops want to say, he made a mistake. He just, he took his shoes off, went through a walk through the golf course, got hot. Okay, maybe a local community is going to buy into that. But when you look at it on that bigger scale, that's not what's happening. Next. Anybody heard of this case? Happened right down the lake here a ways. Of all of the guys I've ever written about, I kind of say that Joseph was one of the cleanest cut, nicest kids you could talk about. His parents went through hell. And I probably am guessing they are still going through hell trying to figure out what the heck happened. So he was in the military academy, went missing October 22nd, 2003, 1 a.m., Kingston. He was just elected the previous week squadron leader, the most prestigious position in his class. He had the world on his shoulder. Great student, girlfriend, straight arrow, never did anything wrong. He was what every parent would want as a kid. He was described as being super smart, extremely mature, well-rounded, and knew where he was in life, and knew where he wanted to go. Next. The way the story goes is that he's in his dorm room with his longtime girlfriend working on a paper for a law class. 1 a.m., the girlfriend falls asleep on his bed. He is sitting at his desk working on his project when she falls asleep. 5:30 a.m., she wakes up, Joe's gone. Joe's cell phone, wallet, and watch are on his desk. Key points right there. Cell phone, wallet, and watch. Electronic, probably. Cell phone, definitely electronic. And many of the cases I write about, people don't have their cell phone with them when they disappear. And why is that important? Can anybody tell me? Get tracked with your cell phone. So some reason, how many kids that age go anywhere without their cell phone? Right? And wallet. Where are you going? Well, he never came back to the room. At 4:30 that afternoon, the girlfriend knew he had basketball practice and went there. And he wasn't there. And then she knew something was really wrong because the guy never missed a class, never missed sports. Next. So has anybody ever seen what the academy looks like? Sits on this peninsula, river on one side, lake on the other. Beautiful setting. Next. Missing person reports filed. It's on military property that he disappears. It's a military investigation. They went through his computer. They found nothing. Academy sits on the river in the lake I talked about. November 13th, his body's in the river. Coroner could not determine the cause of death. Now, go ahead next. They had multiple inquests. Canines never could figure a scent of where he might have went. 2 inquests, 2 autopsies, no cause of death. Parents stated the Grizells always maintained that their son's death was neither an accident or a suicide. What does that mean? In my mind, that means he was abducted and murdered. What else can it mean? Am I missing something? Body missing for 3 weeks. Pathologist testified body consistent with being in the water for 1 to 2 weeks. Where was he for the other week? A key point. a subtle point that's missed by most of the press. And you wonder why the press doesn't ask the hard questions? I would have said at that press conference, well, if he's 1 to 2 weeks, where was he for the other week? Well, we don't know. Well, another consistency in many of these cases. Is everyone following what I'm saying? Everyone? Yeah? Okay. Next. The most recent case that has happened within the last week. Kid from, again, University of Minnesota. Missing since last Tuesday. The date on this is May 19th this year. Medical examiner determined the cause of death. Walking from school building to school building at the University of Minnesota, disappeared, is found later on in the Mississippi River. In a river where there have been many other of the same students from the same university and associated universities that have been found in the river. And this is really near the Ford Motor Plant where there's been 2 other bodies found in that exact same location, all with an unknown cause of death. But that is the most recent case. I'm putting this in, this is a Facebook response to the post I made about that young man who died. This was made by a woman who's read the book. Seriously, wake up, people. Why do so many people think there's anything normal about this? Same effing story time after time. Why don't the addicts, severely mentally ill, night roaming the street, people of our society show up dead in the river? Stop right there. Last time I talked about this, I tried to bring everybody into this and say, okay, think about, and I can only speak for California and Colorado because I know it, we have a lot of homeless people. A lot of people that are addicted to alcohol and drugs, roaming the river and living around the rivers, down in the shrubbery and the bushes. There is not one of these cases that involves those people. These are college-aged men, women, and older men that are brilliant, that are going on to great things, that are ending up in these locations. If you used common sense, you would say, there has to be some of those people, Dave, that are ending up in those locations and you're not talking about them. I wish there were so I could maybe make some sense of this. It's not happening. And I put this up here because this woman sends me a lot of emails, but darn if she isn't right on key with what's happening. I've been researching these issues for years, read his book, school, and we're constantly told no foul play. Every one of these cases, the police come out and say no foul play. And the majority of the public buys into this. That is an injustice. That is for families of the victims and beyond disrespect to the young men and women. That's why I'm telling you that on all of the parents, all of them will say, my son wouldn't do that. My son didn't do that. My son wouldn't go for a swim in the river when he's going for greatness at the military academy. He's not going to walk out of a room without his phone and his wallet. However, I believe law enforcement investigators are beside themselves with these cases. It's out of their control. One thing I talk about to people is that in politics, and I can speak directly to this, there was a case we had that involved a motorcycle gang in California. And they killed this guy in a bar. And this guy was a good guy. He was there with his girlfriend. And one of the bikers was hitting on the girl. He said something, and they walked out to the parking lot. And she was in the bathroom, and they killed him. We know who did it. And we went out interviewed this guy at the hospital the next morning. I was working Vice Intelligence at the time, and I knew a lot about motorcycle gangs. We interviewed the guy. The description he gave, we knew who it was. We were going back to the police station to get a photo lineup done and take it back to him, and he ended up dying. He was beat bad. So we go back into the chief's office with our lieutenant with a plan about how we're going to go in and infiltrate the biker gang and arrest this guy. And the chief, I'm in there with my lieutenant, and it was a great plan. And the lieutenant even said, oh, he's going to buy into this, Dave. Just lay it out for him. So I lay it out for him. Chief says this. It's a big case, right, Dave? Okay, yeah, it's a big case. And we're going to take down one of the biggest biker gang members in California, right? Oh, yeah. He goes, Dave, remember something. Big case, big problem. No case, no problem. We have no issue, guys. And we walked out of the room, and I looked at my lieutenant, and I walked up in the hallway, and I go, can you just believe that? We heard that? Because that's unbelievable. I apply that here because if there is no problems, if there is no foul play, we have no issue. You know what I'm saying? So, and this woman also knows that I talked about La Crosse, Wisconsin in the auditorium essentially throwing the chief out saying this is garbage. And then she went down and she laid out the places that this is happening right now. Please wake up. Pay more attention. Something very sinister is happening to the best of our young citizens all over. It is not suicide. Or I'm so drunk I'm going to jump in a freezing river or lake. She kind of summed it all up right there. And the responses were overwhelmingly positive because she spoke from a position of knowledge. Now, I've given these talks all over. And I've never had anybody really challenge me, probably because I know the topic well. But it's very hard in your position to go out and explain to somebody, hey, this is happening. Because even on Facebook or other media sites, I get these responses from people who maybe hear me on the radio once, and they say, you know what, you just can't accept it. People get drunk and they fall in the river and they die. Again, if you buy into that, then at least do me the favor and read a book. And see the evidence I lay out, and the methodology makes some historical. Go ahead. Anybody tell me the common denominator of this group? Exactly. Very good. Hunters. Now, what's important about all of these cases is that there's a historical perspective to it. It didn't start happening 2 years ago. This has been happening for a long time. This is a case that happened in Ontario. 2 guys were hunting, middle of winter, hunting moose, disappeared. One of the few times that I ever write about where 2 people disappeared at the same time. What's interesting is this man right here, he had a disability and he worked for the railroad, and he could hardly walk. And his relatives said, he can't walk more than a couple hundred yards at most. So they were going to set up in an area and wait. People come back for him. Both of them are gone. Both of them never. This is the weirdest case right here. His last name is Salmon, S-A-L-M-A-N. I talked to his wife. He was hunting in British Columbia on a lake where there have been many, many disappearances of unexplained origin. He had his dogs with him, and the wife said he brings his dogs everywhere. He parked his camper in this parking lot, and one night, for some reason, he left the camper without the dogs. Other campers in the area hear gunshots, and they call the RCMP because it's in the middle of the night. They think poaching or something. And then some people even thought they were getting shot at. They come out and search, and about a half a mile from where his camper was parked, on the other side of the lake they were on, they find a rifle, his pants, and his boots laying on the bank. And they knew it was his pants because they found his wallet in his pants. And they theorized that he just decided in the middle of night to swim across that lake. I'm not kidding you. This is what they told the wife. And he drowned in the lake. Well, the wife is a very smart lady, and she did some research, and she hired the best underwater search and rescue team that she could find because she wanted her husband's body recovered. And this husband and wife team from British Columbia, they go all over the world searching, put their boat in the water, and they searched for 5 days, and they came out and they said, hey, your husband's not in that lake. I guarantee that he's not in that lake. Well, after I wrote the book, I started getting calls from search and rescue people in British Columbia. And one of the people was on this search. And they said, strangest thing they ever saw. They got there on the second day when they were cleared to go in. And as they're driving up, our RCMP SWAT team is coming out of the force. And they said, search and rescue people going, what's going on? And they go, well, you can search all around the lakeside right here, but we don't want you going into the woods. And they said, well, why is that? And they said, well, we had those shots fired a couple days ago, so we don't know what's going on. And they said, but you said that he's in the lake. Yeah, but we don't want you going to those woods. And the search and rescue guy tells me, he goes, Dave, I don't know what's going on, but I can guarantee one thing. We didn't go in the woods. Raymond's never been found. The wife doesn't have answers. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the RCMP for that report because I wanted to see the report. They sent it to her, and it was the most redacted, worthless piece of garbage I've ever seen. It was a couple of paragraphs that said nothing about nothing regarding nothing. And she even said it to me, goes, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed I got this. He's never been found. There's really no good explanation what happened. Yes? I'm only famous for not giving out my theories? Come on, man. I'll tell you what, I'll give you my due later on about that. Let me get through this, and if I don't say, remind me. Okay? Go ahead. Next. So, again, these are all hunters. And the reason I'm talking about them here is that Nova Scotia, BC, Newfoundland, Ontario. And they're pretty strange. Now, I want everyone to understand that these are not all of the hunters that are missing from Ontario. There's hundreds probably in the last 200 years. But I work within the confines of that profile that we've established. And I try to stay true to that profile. Now, it's very hard to get facts behind cases to even see if they match the profile we're looking at many other times. A lot of times, people disappear because they want to disappear. And there's no law against that. But just because somebody disappears, it's hard to understand the 2 weeks before they disappeared, what facts were gleaned while they disappeared, what did the searchers find on the search, and all of those things go into the mix to determine what happened on that profile. Next. Common denominator. This is a sad, sad group. Dennis Martin, Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Anybody hear me talk about him before? Never found. Dennis Johnson, Yellowstone, never found. Gray Rock Mountain, this is 30 miles from my house, never found. This boy disappeared 5 miles from where this boy disappeared, but it was 40 years later. Do you think the people that worked that case ever even thought about this case? This guy disappeared. He's from Texas. Him and his family, he was in southern Colorado, disappeared in a super rural area near his cabin, walking the dog, never found. This case in Newcomb, New York, one of the strangest cases I ever wrote about was that a family retreat compound. People were really wealthy. And his uncle said, hey, go back to the house, change your clothes, come on back. He disappeared. They brought in green berets. Only 2 times I've ever known where green berets were used. And they searched for him. And if this is the area he disappeared in New York, they went all the way around the high peaks, all the way back down the other side, and right here, adjacent to a giant swamp, they lost the scent and he was never found. They said it was a 30 to 40 mile trek that the dogs were on following him. Do you believe that boy could travel that far? I don't think so. Sammy Belkey disappeared Crater Lake National Park, never found. Ingebrigtsen on the perimeter of Crater Lake, never found. Perimeter of Crater Lake, never found. North Lake Tahoe, never found. These aren't areas like Ingebrigtsen disappeared in a super rural area of the outside the park. He was with his dad and his grandpa, and they had a permit to cut a Christmas tree, and there was snow on the ground. His dad went nuts looking for his son. Every time I've met a dad that has lost their son, it has ruined their life forever. And the parents carry that with them in a lifetime. They don't know what happened, and that's the worst thing. They blame themselves, but logic doesn't follow that you should have lost. Belke, he had autism, and he was with his dad on a father-son kind of getaway for the weekend. I've been to the exact spot where he disappeared. I've walked the exact spot. He was on a perimeter road area of Crater Lake. Anybody here ever been to Crater Lake? If there's one park you ever go to in the United States, you should go to Crater Lake. It's the most beautiful place you can imagine. It's a giant mountain that blew up, and there's a huge lake inside of it. And it's supposedly the cleanest water in the world. And it's dark blue. It's just gorgeous. And around the perimeter of this, they have a road. Him and his dad were driving the road. They stopped. He got out. He ran to the top of this hill, and his dad said, "Hey, come back." Make a long story short, the son ran over the other side, and for 20 miles, there's nothing. And Park Service threw everything they could at it. That's what they said, and they never found him. I interviewed the sheriff of the county where that boy disappeared. And he told me on the record, on camera, that he goes, why the Park Service didn't call me the first day that boy was missing, I don't know. They waited to the end of the second day to get more resources in there, and then we threw everything we could at it. And he goes, my rule is, when a young boy is missing in the woods or a young girl, we throw everything at it from day one. Why they waited, I don't know. Now, how many people know I was involved in making a movie called Missing 411? Movie's just about pretty close to being done. This is one of the stories that we highlight in there. And the reason it's highlighted is because it deals with the National Park Service and their refusal, number one, to help me at any level in figuring this stuff out, releasing data at any level. National Park Service in the United States has about 300 locations, national parks and monuments. They have a huge contingent of federally trained U.S. park policemen. They go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They're highly trained. These guys and ladies are super smart and super good. They're better than most of the policemen in small towns around the U.S. because of their training. And it's because of that I knew that they would have the data I wanted on missing people. Let's face it, I could interview any police chief in a medium-sized city in Canada or the United States and ask them, I want a list of missing people from your jurisdiction, and I would have that within 30 minutes. I can almost guarantee that for a fact. We filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the National Park Service for a list of missing people on their properties. And they stated they don't have a list of missing people. Their response was, we rely, this is a quote, on the institutional memory of our employees for that. I swear, it's the truth. And many times I've gone back to them saying, well, have you gotten a list? No. Well, a professor at a university happened to read my books, and she started an online petition to force the National Park Service to put an online list of every missing person in their system. Let's face it, all the large departments in the U.S., they have a list of missing people, and most of them have photos. Why doesn't the Park Service have that? So, at the time, I was a printed author. And there's a legal section in the Freedom of Information Act saying that if you're a printed author, we will waive the fees to you to establish and get the information you want. It's perfect. I asked for it. A month later, an attorney calls me and says, well, we did some research, and your books aren't in enough libraries to qualify for that. I swear. And I had an attorney look, and there's nowhere in the Freedom of Information Act does it even say that. Yes, sir. I'm sure that's some kind of floating number that they just make up. Yes. That's what I was saying at the beginning. You and I are tied so close you don't understand it. But many of the disappearances happened in parks. And, I mean, I'm just talking about less than 3% of 2%, maybe, of all the cases I've documented, which is about 2,000. And tonight you're going to get just scratch the surface of the issue. But your Freedom of Information Act is just like ours. Now, why would these things be occurring on federal property? Because they control the investigation. They control the information. Now, when the incident happens in a state park or on a county park or on public property, I don't have a problem getting it. But now when you start talking federal, many times they don't want to give it up. I don't know why. Next. Next. Has anybody ever heard me talk about Charles McCullers? You guys? Okay. It'd be boring, but I'll. So McCullers was a 19-year-old kid fresh out of high school from Virginia. And he wanted to tour the national parks before he went on to college. I know a lot of kids that have done this. It's not that abnormal. So he goes to Crater Lake. A lot of strange things happen at Crater Lake. And in the chapter I wrote about the lake, they've been happening since the 1800s. And I've got cases in there about disappearance that validate that fact. And the Native Americans that lived around Crater Lake, that was one area you never went to. It was a bad place. So McCullers goes to Crater Lake, 29th of January, 1975, lots of snow. There was 20-foot drifts around the lake. So what happens is, Crater Lake, there's one main access road that goes right up to the side of the lake, and then there's about a 400-foot gradual slope into the water. Everybody goes there, takes pictures. There's really no place else to go. You can't go drive around the lake. Those are all closed because of snow. It's just one parking lot right there. So he disappears. 10 months later, he's found. How he's found is that there's some backpackers 12 miles into the wilderness that go up this box canyon, and there's a 6-foot in diameter Douglas fir tree that's fallen across this little creek. And they stepped up onto the top of the Douglas fir tree, and they're looking down, and they see pieces of white bone. They see a skull cap, and they see the most unusual thing that a ranger told me he's ever seen in his 30-year career. Why did this ranger talk? Well, number one, I tracked him down, and he had retired. His name was Marion, the nicest man I have ever met, just about. And I went to his house outside of Medford, Oregon. I knocked on the door, just never called him or anything. And I said, "Hey, Marion, my name's Dave Paulides. I'm a retired policeman. I'm investigating some cases of missing people. Could I talk to you?" He said, "Come on in." Him and his wife sit me down. He's sitting over coffee, and he says, "Well, what do you want to talk to me about?" Well, for 30 years, Marion was a junior high school science teacher. And during the summer in June, every year, he would move his family up to the housing compound at Crater Lake, and they would stay there for the summer, and he was one of the law enforcement officers on site on that location. When he was a young man, he spent a year at the Law Enforcement Training Center getting trained to do that exact job. So he almost had a full-time job all year, being a science teacher, and then he'd go be a policeman. He says, "What do you want to talk to me about, Dave?" And I said, "Charles McCullers." His eyes got like this pan. He goes, 30 years. You're talking about the strangest case that ever happened to me. How'd you ever hear about it? I dug deep, Marion. He goes, "Oh, you got a good story here." So, people see this death scene, and they see, as they look down on the other side of this log, a man's pants. Imagine a man or a lady. You got pants on and you got a belt. You unbuckle the buckle. You drop your pants down to your socks. You drop your underwear down to your socks. And that's exactly the scene as they're looking down. Socks at the end of the pants, buckle undone, underwear inside, but just the rim of the underwear because the rest had rotted away. People backed out of there, went in, told the Rangers. Marion and his partner got on horseback and rode in 12 miles. And he said, Dave, we got there, we looked around, and we said, this is not good. And they said, we backed out, we went back to headquarters, and we called for an FBI evidence response team from Portland, Oregon to fly in and work that crime scene because it wasn't normal. Something happened there, Dave. But the people found a small backpack that supposedly Charles was carrying. And in that backpack, there was a Volkswagen key. And in the old days, the Volkswagen key kind of had the VW cut out at one end. And his dad had explained to the Rangers, if you ever find this, you found my son. And they found this. But Marion said, Dave, 30 years. Two things I find on every dead body scene I've ever researched and found. And it's been over 100. And what you find is you find boots or shoes. Because shoes and boots are made of a material that doesn't decompose at the same rate cloth does. And he goes, Dave, we looked around there for an entire day. And the FBI came in and worked that scene for a week. They never found his boots. And they found the little bones in his socks from his feet. And he had a broken tibia, the top part of your right leg, that was inside the pant leg of his right pants. And his belt buckle was undone. He says, so you tell me, Dave, you were a cop for a long time. Explain that scenario to me, that he was 12 miles in the middle of winter. How did he get there, number one? Where did his boots go? Why would he drop his pants? Where's his coat? And how could he survive in that environment? And he goes, those were all the questions we laid on the FBI. So Dave, being the good investigator he is, I left Marion's house. The next day, I filed a Freedom of Information Act against the FBI for the report. And what I got was the biggest. Imagine 3 pieces of paper, and 90% of it is blacked out by the line. Why? Yeah. So when they find people, do they ever have organs missing, puncture wounds? No, there's never any, per se, injury or foul play to the body. Yes? So legally, the only thing they can redact is personal or witness information. So let's say you are diabetic or you were taking certain kinds of prescription drugs. That can be redacted. Witnesses' names and locations can be redacted. Supposedly, the facts relevant to the case cannot be redacted. But anybody with any moderate amount of intelligence would know that 80% of it was redacted. The things in there, and, the, we, see. It looked like something out of the X-Files. So, pants, no boots, no shoes. How McCullough got that 12 miles in, nobody could answer. And nobody's ever tried to answer. So it's a strange mystery. And, of course, one of the things I asked Marion, I said, so if somebody had skis, cross-country skis, could they have made it from the side of the lake 12 miles in? He said, no way. I said, how about snowshoes? No way. I said, well, why is that? And he goes, because, Dave, we had drifts 20 to 30 feet. You would have sunk in no matter what you were wearing. Okay. Next. Part of the research that I really needed to get through to people at the very beginning was to show the impossible nature of some journeys. I just told you about McCullough, 19-year-old healthy man. This involved David Allen Scott, and 2 years old, missing in 1957, Monroe Village. This is the Sierra Nevada mountains run from north to south, kind of in the middle of California on the eastern edge. And this would be on the southern edge of the Sierra Nevada mountains, on the eastern side of the mountains, fairly close to Nevada. And this is called Twin Lakes. This place is gorgeous. It sits in a valley surrounded by granite. This is just on the outskirts of two national parks, Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Park. And those are just south of Yosemite, which has the biggest cluster of missing people in the world. So, Lost Boy 3, he was actually 2. He disappears, and he's camping right here with his family. There's one road in, one road out. His dad says, I saw him. He was right there a second ago. I went into my camper. I come back out. He's gone. Next. So, they're camped right here. This is a really steep canyon wall. And there's this switchback trail that goes like this, all the way up to here. You go down the other side, then you go up, 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 and over the top. This is about 9,000 feet. This is about 11. They search for him. They not find him. This guy brings a dog in, and the dog takes off and starts going up the switchback. Now, you can stand anywhere on the switchback and look back down and see your camp. And everyone can see you, and you can see them. There's no cover here. So the dog starts going like this, and at the end of the day, the dog stops. They come back down. The next day, they bring in a wilderness survival team from the military to search this area. And one of the guys decides, well, if the dog stopped here, I'm going to go to the other side, go up over the top, down the other side, and I'm going to start searching in here. Late that day, up this mountain, down the other, up here, they find David Scott on the other side of a boulder dead. They asked the parents, did you see anything on the mountainside? They asked everybody in the canyon. No, nobody went up there. No, nobody saw anything. They asked everybody, could your son have done that? You're kidding. My son's 2 years old. You barely walk across the parking lot. So he's found at 10,500 feet, no shoes, wearing a diaper, dead. How did he get there? Nobody knows. Could your son at 2 years old have done that? Next. So, this boy camping with a group of people in his Boy Scout troop and his dad and his couple other leaders. In the morning he wakes up and he goes fishing with his dad at this lake. Puts his foot in the water, gets his foot wet, and tells his dad, hey, I'm going to walk back to camp to get some socks. It's like 100 yards, down a trail, through some trees, and into camp. His dad watches him walk into the trees. Half an hour later, he doesn't come back. His dad goes back. He's not there. They search for a month. He's never been found. And this area is up near timberline. There's no... Up above, 300 feet above where he disappeared, they found his sock in amongst a group of boulders, but they never found anything of him. Weeks of searching. Next. 7 years old, Jill Hatch. This is very near an area where two other guys have disappeared. She went 3,500 feet. She was fishing with her dad along a creek. She disappears. Dad doesn't understand where she went, how she disappeared so quickly. They search for 3-4 days, and they find her body 3,500 feet up this mountain, almost straight up. She's dead, laying on her stomach. Nobody could believe she got there. Nobody could understand how she got there. The creek was 3,500 feet down there. Everybody with any rational sense knows at 7 years old, you're not going to do that. And she left with her dog. Dog was later found okay. They said she died of exposure. That's the other catch-all. You ever die and they really don't know? Exposure. Hypothermia. Yeah?
What about all the other dogs in these stories? Are they found, or are they missing, or?
It's a mixed bag. Majority of them are found. A lot of times, you know that show, The Dog Whisperer? I've written in the books, damn, maybe I should get that guy to come talk to the dog and figure out what happened, but sometimes the dogs are found, and I would say in an equal percentage are never found.
So what are the dogs like? Are they disturbed, or are they just, like, is there any emotional issues with them?
In one case, a guy disappeared in northern Minnesota. They found the dog, and they did some smart things. They took the stools and they analyzed it for what the dog had been eating for the 2 weeks it was gone. What didn't make sense is this northern area of Minnesota, it's like bog, swamps, water everywhere. But the vet said the dog was severely dehydrated. That didn't make sense. So the thought was by law enforcement the dog was confined or restricted in some way, somehow, somewhere. But most of the time, guys aren't smart enough to do that.
There's no mutilation or anything in the blood?
No mutilation, nothing like that. Yes? Yes?
When the dogs, the bloodhounds are searching and they lose the scent, has there ever been a time or times where they found some other scent? The dogs are reacting in a way that doesn't make sense.
So we like to read their minds and know. A lot of times what the handlers say is that they'll get the scent in a parking lot or something, and they'll walk them to the trail that they knew the person was last seen on. And in my books I write that the handler says the dog walked in a circle and sat down at my feet. Not normal. Or the dog would walk up the trail a little bit and just sit down and show no interest. The statements, and I often quote exactly what's said, but it doesn't make sense for those dogs. Because those dogs, if you know them, if you've ever worked around them, they're so eager to get out there. They live for the hunt. They want to do it. And a lot of people have said, well, maybe it's a scent that they're frightened of. That could be. But dogs aren't afraid of bears. Dogs aren't afraid of mountain lions. So if it's that wouldn't work. Next. Okay. This is a great story. I met this man. Part of Oregon, very, very rural, lots of elk in this area. He was from another part of Oregon, went out and visited his grandfather. They were around a barn, him and his two brothers. His mom calls him in for dinner. His brother said he walked around one side of the barn and they went around another. And when they got on the other side, he was gone. Keith Parkins, 2 years old at the time. He's disappeared. Everyone in the community is called, and it's rolling hillsides in this part of eastern Oregon. Not a lot of cover, but some cover. So they get everybody in the area, hundreds of ranchers and things, and everybody starts searching. Well, he's missing for 19 hours. He's found 12 to 15 miles away from where he disappeared. And they figure he walked over 2 mountains, through 2 creeks, through umpteen dozen barbed wire fences. He had no memory of what happened. It says here, the father said he thought the little boy, in panic, must have been running most of the time to have covered so much distance. You believe that? So, I met this guy last year for the first time. Really, really. A nicest man you could ever ask. A little older than me now. And his mom, 92 years old, still alive, smart as a whip. And Keith goes, hey Dave, you want to meet my mom? I go, yeah. Because she was there. I go, is she quick enough? She know what's going on? Oh yeah. So we go to the house. She walks out with the clothing and the shoes Keith was wearing when he disappeared. Unbelievable. And to see these cruddy, yucky, leather-bound shoes that you and I wouldn't walk 10 feet in, and he walked supposedly 15 miles. We even asked him, Keith, look at these shoes. He goes, I know. They don't look too comfortable, do they? I go, no. And I go, so what do you think happened? He goes, Dave, I've been asked that my whole life. I don't have any memory. I never did have a memory. He was found laying face down next to an iced-over pond, unconscious. The great, great story. Yeah. Does what? Teletransportation, teleportation. I've heard that before. Yeah. No, that's one of those things. Okay, so I've got to stop there, but question and answers. So I'll give you my best shot, best I can. One thing I won't do is a lot of people will say, oh, you know, this is a conspiracy theory. Folks, I have never given you a theory. And I've given you a series of facts. Facts. So when somebody says, oh, this is part of that conspiracy theory stuff, I tell every host that I've ever met, drop it, because there's no theories here. I'm going to lay out a series of facts. And through those facts, we can come to some conclusions that they're interrelated. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to come out here with a mic. If you could just get right to your question, then we can fit more questions in. So try to eliminate the preamble. Immediately following the Q&A, which will go till approximately quarter after, then we will assemble outside for a meet and greet. If you've bought a book, you can get it signed. And then, after that, 10 o'clock, apparently there is a pub crawl in the works. Well, we're going to crawl to one pub. And that would be, I believe it's O'Grady's on College. Okay? Yeah, stay away from the water. Okay. Questions? Just raise your hand.
I was just wondering, in a nutshell, what do you think is going on?
So what do I think is going on? So let's think about this. I spend all my time researching missing people. And I've spent 6 years now, probably about 12,000 hours on this topic. And each one of the books is a different spoke in the wheel. Let's say we have 3 or 4 spokes now. I don't think I've discovered everything. And I've spent all my time researching that. There are people in this world that Richard, myself, and Patrick live in that are experts at each one of these peripheral things. Whether you want to talk about UFOs, reptoids, Bigfoot, teleportation, portals. I'm not an expert in any of those areas. So how could I say it's something where I don't have the time to research that? I'm laying out a certain set of facts for you. And there's people in this room that know more about what I just said than I'll ever know. So if somebody can convince me that this equals this, I'm going to pay attention. But I've been sat in rooms for 7 years now at conferences and things, and people come up to me and they say, we know what it is. We're positive. And they'll lay it out for me. I've heard this 20 times. And I've had thesis-length papers given to me that lay out people's thoughts on these 20 different peripheral things. And they're positive that's it. But those are people that are experts in that one area. And so anytime someone's an expert in one area, I really wonder how big their grasp is of the total picture. Because if you don't, I like to tell people, you know, I'm 10 miles wide and I'm an inch thick. Got a little bit of everything lined up, but to say I'm an expert in any one of those other areas would not be true, and my opinion would be worthless. And what happens if I come out and I tell you it's that, and then the next day somebody comes out and proves it can't be that? Well, now all of a sudden my integrity and credibility is that.
All right, next. The gentleman in front.
Any talk of hypnosis for Parkins?
For Parkins. We did talk to him about that, and I honestly think that he was so young at the time that I don't even think that would work.
Have you ever checked for radiation?
Explain how that would work.
If there was any radiation traces in the area, has it ever been checked for?
Area of what?
Where you found the dead bodies or the missing bodies.
Okay. So you got to remember something, and that's the paradigm of the searchers that I explained. They're not thinking criminal. They're not thinking anything unusual. They're just thinking they're searching for a missing person. They found him, job's done. They're never thinking along these lines. Ever. And in fact, let me tell you, the coroners never check for radiation on bodies unless they suspect radiation poisoning, which is really never. So the answer to that is no.
You mentioned GHB, but there's also scopolamine. Does that have any bearing on anything?
Not that I've heard of that, but I've never heard it brought up in a coroner's report.
You've listed a number of profile points. You're in a unique situation to get a lot of information. Are there profile points that you may not have mentioned because you're not totally comfortable with, but are still maybe intriguing?
No. Each one of my books lists everything that's realistically there. And at this point, if there was something I missed, somebody else, a reader would have brought it up. And I don't want to miss anything. I definitely would say it, and I wouldn't want to harbor anything.
Well, David, since you mentioned the date rape drug, have you ever considered like a group of satanic cults or something operating?
So once you read my books, you'll understand at the end of the first book that's impossible.
Okay.
And you got to think about it from a logic standpoint. In these search and rescue efforts, they have professional trackers and canines. Professional trackers never find any tracks. Canines aren't going to track any scent. If there was this group of satanic people, where are their tracks? Where is their scent?
Just wondering, what would the government be like benefiting from like not disclosing like all this information?
Oh, that's brought up all the time about the national parks. Some people will say, well, they don't want to publicize how many people are really missing because they need the revenue for their parks. I can't believe that. If anything, and I tell this in front of any group, the National Park Service has great people. The people you meet when you go in the park are the best of the best. If you ever go to a national park, they're the friendliest people you ever want to meet. And that's not the people that I'm angry at. It's the top tier in the National Park Service that are making decisions about this. It's not the frontline people. In fact, I doubt any of them even know what we're talking about. So I doubt it. Yeah.
I was just wondering about the GHB issue. You mentioned, I think it was the coroner who decided to do some research. I was wondering what percentage of the missing people he or she found the traces of GHB in.
I think it was 7 or 8 scattered across the U.S. You've got to remember that it's probably 1/100th of 1%, or maybe 1/1000th of 1% of the bodies they ever test for. And then it's got to be one that fits that profile. So until they determine that their screening determination on what they're looking for changes, I doubt we'll ever hear of this again.
Has search and rescue ever disappeared? And from your contact with them, have you ever heard them mention staircases in the deep woods?
That's a complete myth. Staircases, if you ever read that, that's a complete lie. And somebody made that up. Because what I tell everybody, you hear that story, and if you ever found anything odd in the woods, what's someone going to do? They're going to GPS it, and they're going to publicize it. And we're going to go out and we're going to be able to see it. I'm never there. There's some people that are on certain websites that write fictional stories about my cases just to get hits. It's a complete lie. I've had 100 people tell me it's a complete lie. Yeah.
You've said people contacted you with top secret clearance with information. What kind of stuff have they said?
Well, I did mention the GHB. And that's huge. Yeah.
What kind of concentrations did the people have in their blood that were autopsies done? Autopsies done?
Yeah. They were off the charts high.
And how does this tie into like time loss? Because you're saying like the elimination is very fast from the system, the half-life is very short, right?
Right.
But you're saying there's like a week of time.
No, it's a matter of hours, and your system gets rid of it. That's
So
the
it might
reason
be
it's
like
such a good date rape drug.
temporal, like.
What?
You mentioned earlier you thought it was aerosol? Or,
Aerosol?
yeah, that they were getting it?
No, that's not what I said. I said, I theorize it has to be aerosol because they're not getting it from drinks and they're not getting it injected. There are a few other ways.
You ever consulted a psychic or a medium?
I would in a minute, except I'm very protective of victims and their families. And I've worked with them in the past successfully. The person's no longer around. And for me to work with somebody, they would have to prove. So first of all, my information's out there. The people that are missing, the information's out there. If somebody can go find somebody, go do it.
You'd hired a remote viewer, and he couldn't. He saw some kid in a cave, but it was like too dark. His head couldn't go to what he was seeing. Was there any other information about that?
So remote viewers, if anybody doesn't know, there was supposedly a program in the U.S. government that had a remote viewing team. And essentially it's kind of like psychics, except these guys do it and ladies did it more scientifically in a kind of a predetermined set profile. I've talked to 2 of them. Both of them have not ever done anything.
So a number of the cases that you talked about, it seems like the people pretty much engaged in like superhuman feats in terms of the distances they covered and things like that. Has it ever been theorized that there was possibly some sort of psychotic break or mental state that they went into where their body was operating in an unusual way that would allow them to do that?
Okay, so let's take that out of the equation for a second. And let's talk about 2-year-olds that did these amazing feats. It's not going to happen. You know, until you have kids, until you've lived around kids and you realize, hey, my 2-year-old doesn't want to walk around the mall with me. And to think that they're going to climb up a mountain 3,000 feet, I don't think so. I mean, am I being unrealistic about that? Does anybody want to?
No.
Yeah. Never. No, and if, I should say this, if the person has a history of mental health problems, we'll bet the case won't even work it. So, and that's for a lot of reasons, because sometimes people just want to drop out of society. They want to kill themselves, whatever that issue is, but I don't want any part of that. Yes?
I was just going to say 2 comments here. The MO seems to be a lot like the cattle mutilations. The no signs of anyone landing anywhere. They're just gone. They're dropped down. And secondly, some of these people, as you said, they're brilliant or they're involved with some kind of research. So to me, that rings a bell too. So I just want your comments on that. And also, when you're dropped into water, a lot of forensics are destroyed. And you said those people basically were put into water, and water will do that. So just your comments on that.
I think there's much more to be gleaned from being in water than there is from being on land. And like I said, you could keep somebody on land that's dead for a week, and it won't show what a body in water will show for a week. So I think that there's a lot more to be gleaned from it, from nada. Now, cattle mutilations, you're wrong on one point. There are some landing sites that have been found. And if you read a book by Chris O'Brien, and he wrote a book, he's a good friend, and he'll say, Dave, there's no proof that this is aliens. There's no proof that it's our government. There's no proof of what's happening here other than something unusual. Now, a lot of those cows were dropped because they broke bones. None of the people I know have broken any bones that were found. So the parallels to me, we've talked about it a lot. I don't see it. And I'm pretty open-minded. I don't see the areas where the cattle disappeared and were dropped is not the areas where people were found or disappeared. say that, well, there's no mutilations of people either.
Hi, David. I'm a huge fan. Okay. So the next of kin and the parents, what do they believe, like in the pit of their stomach, happened to their loved ones?
They don't know. They really but they will say that they don't believe what law enforcement is saying. There's a case called the Jared Adadero case, and we didn't get to it, but their parents, Jared's dad, Alan, is a really good friend. We usually get together for lunch once or twice a month. And he says, Dave, they told me it was a mountain lion. I went out and I did all the research, talked to the experts. I proved they were wrong. It can't be a mountain lion, Dave. And it's one of those things where I think that parents, the horror that they live with is just beyond comprehension. And they're looking for answers, and nobody really wants to help them. It's horrible.
And when's the movie coming out? And where can we see it?
That's a great thought. It depends on what film festivals we get it in. We have to premiere it at a film festival, or they won't accept it. So we're targeting some big film festivals near the end of this year. So they have to premiere it, and then at some point it'll be released after that. We won't make the Toronto one. They have to, usually have to get it in 3 or 4 months before the film festival. Yeah.
Just offhand, would you happen to know if there's been any sort of disappearances on like Canadian military bases? Like here in Ontario, we have a couple large bases like Petawawa near Ottawa.
So remember, just general disappearances, they have to fit this defined criteria. There's 3 or 4 cases I've written about on military bases in the United States, but they weren't of military personnel. They were people on the military base. In one case, they weren't supposed to be there. In another case, it was a family that lived there, and one of the children disappeared, and that story is really odd. So it happens that...
I'm just wondering, what have Native Americans told you about this? I know you mentioned they said it was odd, but did they give any more details, like maybe there were orbs in the area or something?
So there's no disappearances that I've chronicled on a reservation. We have a huge problem in the United States with crime on reservations. Huge problem. Lots of people missing. Lots of crime. And it's very hard to distinguish the difference between crime and this if there's so much. It's very hard. Meth would show up in blood and urine for 3 days, so they would know if the body's found.
I'm curious on whether or not you've ever been threatened to stop doing your work. No. And why didn't you bring more books?
I won't tell you how much that cost me in postage. I was talking to Patrick. He goes, Dave, it's unbelievable. And the worst thing I can do as bringing my books up is if I don't sell them all. Now what do I do with them? So it's a balancing act. How much to bring? I mean, I wish I would have brought more, but I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if you were aware of a case in Pickering, Ontario, where 6 young teenage boys went missing, and now 1 trace of them has been found. They saw apparently the boat they allegedly stole was floating in the water with the gas tank, and after all these years, 15 years, not 1 trace of 6 boys.
I spent about a month looking at that case, and there's a lot to it that authorities tried to make it sound like it was drowned. And there's no proof to say it wasn't a drowning, so I really don't know. It's hard to believe that they all drowned. Yeah, it is hard. I don't know what to think of it. But once you read that book, The Great Lakes Triangle, not even my book, it costs like $4 on Amazon. You're going to go, well, that kind of fits with all of it on the Great Lakes. Yeah.
Regarding the aerosol,
Yeah.
that takes 2 hours for it to take effect?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, it's pretty rapid.
So, okay, so I thought it would take 2 hours.
On a show.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah.
Hi, I hope I'm not mistaken about this. This shows on really late sometimes. Did you introduce cell phone recording?
I talked about it on a show.
Right, okay, so is that the only instance where there's been a situation like that?
No.
Can you talk about it?
So there's an entire... I got a few minutes. I'll try to make it quick. There's an entire series of cases where people were on the phone talking to loved ones, relatives, blah, 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 and disappeared simultaneously while they're on the phone. And some of the things that are just unbelievable. And in fact, there's two cases out of Minnesota where that exact thing was happening. Now, in the case you're talking about, he was trying to get a hold of his wife, and it went to her voicemail. And it sounded like growls and screams and inhuman type things. And the man was later found in a lake dead. And it was in Minnesota. It's bizarre. Pardon me? I don't think so. I didn't hear that. Yeah, that's what I thought it said. I thought it just said stop.
Regarding the intelligence people that were missing, I read an article some time ago that intelligence service has ways of killing people that they want to kill and not leaving a trace. Is that possible?
So most of these cases, there are traces. I mean, there's a lot of people that have disappeared and never been found. There's no doubt about that. They don't know how they get point to point. And I don't know of anything in technology that we have publicly or privately that could do that.
Hi.
Somebody, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just wondered, because of so many Indigenous women missing, especially out west, but there's other places too, and it's been ongoing for many, many years. I mean, they've had their troubles here. I don't know how much you know about all the Indigenous.
I know a lot about it.
100-year genocide, right?
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of research, and I do work with the Indigenous. So have you ever looked into any of that? Because unfortunately, our government, they don't. We know the RCMP, you can't, rely on them because they were part of a lot of the problem to begin with.
Well, and where do I get my information if I don't get it from them? Who do you rely upon for that credible information? That's part of the problem. Yeah.
Has anyone from the mainstream media ever contacted you, or are they just ignoring this?
Oh, no. There's an article in the Huffington Post called "Don't Be Last in Line." And this guy read the book, and he called me, and he says, "So Dave, tell me about this." And I go, "Really, it's last in line, first in line. If you're on a trail, you're last in line. Sometimes they just disappear. There's nothing there. Sometimes if you're first in line, you go around a corner first. The people go around the corner, you're not there." And he went into detail about that. If you Google Huffington Post, "Don't be last in line," it's a good article. Yeah.
Which national park would you avoid?
So I'm in Canada, so this is a different kind of talk. But one of the things at the end of the talk I talk about is what you can do to make yourself not be a target. So, former policeman in the United States, I can carry a gun everywhere. We have a law in the United States that if you have a concealed weapons license, you can carry a gun in a national park. Now, I tell everybody that I have never found a case where somebody was carrying a personal transponder, which anyone can buy for $150. You go into the woods, you disappear, you pull the transponder, it goes to a satellite, and then it goes to your National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, indicating that there's a missing person. They'll respond search and rescue, and they'll find you within 10 feet of that response. I've never found a case where someone was carrying that and a firearm. One or the other, but never both. I would also say You always tell people where you're hiking and when you're going to be out. Make sure the person checks on you. Carry a hard copy map. Carry GPS. And if you can, always hike with a friend. It's very, very, very rare that two people disappear at the same time. Well,
the Lisa Lamb case, endlessly fascinating and creepy. Is there anything else that you've come up with that, or it's pretty well everything's been said about it?
Lisa Lamb, a British Columbia girl, came down into Southern California, Los Angeles on vacation. She was staying in a hotel. Most bizarre story I've ever written about. And it's the most bizarre crime report that I ever got. But she came down and she was visiting and she was staying in a hotel in kind of a Skid Row neighborhood of Los Angeles. God knows why she picked that hotel. Nobody really knows. There have been a series of homicides, serial killers, all living in that hotel over its lifetime. It's like the creepiest place in the world. She disappears. Nobody finds her for days. They start searching the hotel. And LAPD goes up to the roof and takes a canine up onto the roof from her room. Dog doesn't react, nothing, no scent trail, no zero. Now on the top of the roof there's 4 water tanks, huge water tanks, like 14 feet high, 5 feet around in diameter. And they pump the water up there, and that's the water system for the hotel. LAPD comes back down. Several days later, the maintenance man for the hotel gets a report that the water isn't flowing smoothly into the rooms and there's an odd taste to it. He goes up to the top and he opens these covers that aren't that large. And in one of the tanks, there's Lisa Lamb inside the tank, naked, dead. There's an alarm on the door to the roof. They had to cut the tank open to get her out. How she got in there, what was she doing there, what happened. And there's you might write this name down, Elisa, E-L-I-S-A, Lamb, L-A-M. Look on YouTube. There's the strangest YouTube video that's taken inside of an elevator that she was on just before she disappeared. And her behavior in the elevator is really strange. Good.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions, and then I'm going to remind you once again, after the meet and greet, we can, for those interested, assemble over at O'Grady's on College Street. And they told me if I mentioned that again, they would name a club sandwich after me. So,
Hi, so I was wondering, you mentioned in the case where it was the autistic child that went missing around the very pretty lake that you mentioned.
Crater
I don't
Lake.
remember the name, Crater Lake. And you had said that there were, that the indigenous people of the area had said that they don't go around there, and you kind of alluded to the fact that there were other warnings of other sites where disappearings had happened that had similar warnings from the natives of the area, and I'm wondering if you could speak more to that.
So that's the one site that I can just remember off the top of my head where I've written about the Native Americans had a history there where they would go. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what else or what other areas. There might have been others, but it doesn't come to me right now.
You said there was audio recordings and there was screamings or howlings. Do you have copies of those audio recordings?
They're online.
They're online?
Yeah.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. Google man calls wife Minnesota missing, and it'll come up.
Okay. And have you ever conversed with Dr. Melvin Ketchum?
Have I?
Yeah.
Why did you ask?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just wondering if those audio soundings, what those soundings were like. Obviously, I'm going to go check them out tonight, but I was just wondering if they sound something like the Bigfoot recordings or anything like that.
They don't sound.
Somebody have to sync them up, or
they don't sound human.
No.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, they might be, but they don't sound.
And that's why I asked about Dr. Melvin Ketchum.
okay, I'm going to take one more question over here.
Hi, Dave. Do you think, are any government agencies, be it in Canada or the States, aware of this phenomenon?
So, there's 2 cases of missing kids where the Green Berets got involved. Since I made that public and I talked about it, I said on Coast to Coast that I wanted to talk to a Green Beret member. Since that time, 2 families of Green Beret members have contacted me and said, well, according to You sign a secrecy oath when you're with the Green Berets. That's one reason that's suspicious. Normally in the United States, when a kid goes missing, they call in the National Guard to search. The reason being is the National Guard lives in the community where the search is occurring. Those are people like you and me that work part-time for the Army under a National Guard status, and they search. They come home, they're like you and me, the next day we go to work, but we happen to be National Guard members, and they don't sign a secrecy oath. Why would they call in the National Guard to search for those two boys when they could have called in the Green Berets, when they could have called in the National Guard? And what were the Green Berets doing there, and why would they search for a missing boy? And is it part of the protocol of the Green Berets to search for missing people? Both families called and said, hey, we won't tell you who we are, but our father, our uncle, our dad is a Green Beret member, and he said that's BS. Green Berets won't search for anybody. My response going back is, if they weren't searching, what were they doing?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so outside for a meet and greet, and David would be happy to sign a copy of your book.
Thanks
David
a lot for
Paulides,
coming,
thank you
guys.
very much.
Thank you.